Declining fertility rates done. So, declining fertility is done single person in a household. Natural breakdown, divorce, multiple reasons. Natural breakdown, divorce, separation, lifestyle, career, individualization, autonomy, independence, choice. Natural breakdown. Their divorce, separation, breakdown, modern cohabitation, choice to live alone, choice, the choice. So marital breakdown. The second type of threat to contemporary marriage and family life is the apparent rise in the marital breakdown. Suppose marital breakdown due to increasing choice of the women to work outside conflicting aspirations or demands of the spouses. This fully of estimating number of such breakdown is through examination that includes divorce, separation, and interracial marriages. The spouses together they live together and remain legally married, but the marriage exists in name only. second type of threat to contemporary marriage and family life is the apparent rise in the marital breakdowns. The useful way of estimating the number of such breakdowns is through an examination of the divorce statistics, but these statistics do not on their own provide a valid measure of marital breakdown. Marital breakdown can be divided into three main categories. The first is divorce, the second is separation, and third is the empty shell marriages. Divorce, which refer to legal termination of a marriage. Separation, which refers to physical separation of the spouses, they no longer share the same dwelling, and so-called empty shell marriages, where the spouses live together and remain legally married, but their marriage exists in name only. So this is one of the thread that has against the convention institution of marriage. So divorce statistics, not interested. Separation statistics, okay. Then we have empty cell marriages. Estimates of what is all about the empty cell marriages. Estimates of the extent of the empty marriages can only be based on guesswork. Even where data exists, the concept is difficult to operationalize. That is to put into measurable form. For example, if a couple expresses a high level of dissatisfaction with the relationship, should this be termed as empty shell marriages or not? Historical evidence gives the impression that empty shell marriages are more likely to end in separation or divorce today than in the past. Today argues that in 19th century America, people took for granted as spouses who no longer loved one another and who found together this testful should at least live together in public amity for the sake of their children and for their standing in the community. Even though an increasing number of the empty cell marriages may end in separation and divorce today, this does not necessarily mean that the proportion of such marriages in relation to the total number of marriages is decreasing. In view of the problems involved in measuring marital breakdowns, it is impossible to be completely confident about overall rates of breakdown. However, levels of divorce are now so high that it is probably true that more marriages break down today than they were several decades ago. empty cell marriages. Then we move towards definition of marital breakdowns. So this is done. Empty cell what's the definition of empty cell marriages that is difficult to identify, that difficult to operationalize or measure? If a couple experiences high level of dissatisfaction with the relationship, should this be termed as an empty cell marriages? Historical evidence gives the impression that empty cell marriages are more likely to end in separation and divorce. Today, in the past, William J. Good argues that in the 19th century in America, people took for granted that spouses who no longer love one another, and who found life together distasteful should at least live together in public amenity for the sake of their children and for their standing in the community. Even though increasing number of the empty marriages may end in separation and divorce today, this does not necessarily mean that the proportion of such marriages in relation to the total number of marriages is decreasing. In view of the problems involved in measuring marital breakdown, it is possible to be completely confident about the overall rates of the breakdown. However, levels of the divorce are now so high that it is probably true that more marriages break down today than they did several decades ago. Hi, Trey Thompson. So now I'm moving towards explanation for marital breakdowns. So what are the reason given by the sociologists for the marital breakdowns? So in when marriage ends, so there's a book written by them or thesis written by them. In when marriage ends, Nikki Hart Nikki Hart argued that any explanation of marital breakdown must consider the following factors: those which affect the value attached to the marriage, those which affect the degree of conflict between the spouses. Hi Trey Thompson. Those which affect the opportunities for individuals to escape from the marriage. We'll first consider these factors from a consularist perspective. From this viewpoint, behavior is largely a response to shared norms and values of the society. It therefore follows that a change in the rate of marital breakdown is to some degree a reflection of changing norms and values in general, and in particular those associated with marriage and divorce. So, when explaining the concept of marital breakdown, what are the things that has to be that needs to be considered? Those which affect the what is the value, those which affect the value affecting attached to the marriage, those which affect the degree of the conflict between the spouses, and those which affect the opportunities for individuals to escape from the marriage. Those which affect the value attached to the marriage. Okay, done that explanation for marital breakdown. this when a marriage ends, Nikki Hart. So this is given explanation by Nikki Hart. So Nikki Hart argued that any explanation of marital breakdown must consider the following factors: those which affect the values attached to the marriage, those which affect the degree of conflict between the spouses, and those which affect the opportunities for individual to escape from the marriage. So we'll first consider these factors from a personalized perspective. So there are different perspectives given by different sociologists. From this point of view, behavior is largely response to shared norms and values of the society. It therefore follows that a change in the rate of the marital background is to some degree a reflection of changing norms and values in general, and in particular those associated with marriage and divorce. Okay, value of marriage. So, what is the value of marriage in the society? So, firstly, such as Chalker Parson and Ronald Fletcher argue that the rise in the marital breakdown stems largely from the fact that marriage is increasingly valued. People expect and demand more from the marriage and consequently are more likely to end a relationship which may have been acceptable in the past. Thus, Fletcher argues a relatively high divorce rate may be indicative not of lower but of higher standards of marriage in the society. The high rate of remarriage apparently lends support to Parsons and Fletcher arguments. Thus, paradoxically, the higher value placed on marriage may result in increased marital breakdown. So, these are their perspective. How marital breakdown, which goes against the norms and the values of the society, can still be functional for Parsons and Fletcher. And may be indicative not of the lower but a higher standards of marriage in the society. The high rate of remarriage apparently lends support to Parsons and Fletcher arguments. Thus, remarriages. Thus, paradoxically, the higher value placed on marriage may result in increased marital breakdown. Research suggests that people do still attach a high value to marriage. Of course, the data has suggested this. From the analysis of the British Social Attitude Survey, found that most people do regard marriage as more than just a piece of paper. However, they also regard cohabitation as an acceptable alternative. Okay. This survey found no evidence that people attach a significantly higher value to marriage than they used to. Other explanation therefore seems more plausible. Okay. Conflict between spouses. So, what are the conflict between spouses that leads to the background of the marriage as a social institution? So, this is done value of marriage and from conflict perspective. Conflict between the spouses, and we have modernity, freedom and choice as usual, individualism, the ease of divorce, very easy to get divorced nowadays, divorce legislation, divorce and marital breakdown. Okay, and we move towards the family politics and the social policy. Finish it anyhow. Done. Conflict between spouses. Hart argues, Nikki Hart. Okay. Hart argues that the second set of factors that must be considered in an explanation of marital breakdown are those which affect the degree of conflict between the spouses. From a person's perspective, it can be argued that the adaptation of the family to the requirements of the economic system has placed a strain on the marital relationship. Okay, it has led to relative isolation of the nuclear family from the wider kinship network, and this has led to increasing divorce rate. Nobody to resolve the matter. So, from a personal perspective, it can be argued that the adaptation of the family to the requirements of the economic system has placed a strain on the marital relationship. It has led to relative isolation of the nuclear family from the wider kinship network. William G. Good argues that as a result, the family carries a heavier emotional burden when it exists independently than what it is. It is a small unit within a larger kin's framework. As a consequence, this unit is relatively fragile. So, this nuclear isolated family is fragile because in urban areas there are no kin's network to solve the conflict between the spouses, like it happens in the villages or large kinship-based family patterns or institutions. As a consequence, this unit is relatively fragile. Okay. Now, Edmund Leach makes a similar point. He suggests that the nuclear family suffers from an emotional overload which increases the level of conflict between its members. In industrial society, um, the family specializes in fewer functions. It can be argued that as a result there are fewer bonds to unite its members. Okay. The economic bond, for example, is considerably weakened when the family ceases to be unit of production. So earlier, when the family was a unit of production, both the husband and wife used to work together in the family to produce in the farm and the agriculture field. This strengthened their bonds. But right now, the family is no more a unit of production; it's more of a unit of consumption. The husband goes out, works, hold, and comes home. There no time is left for the spouses to take care of each other or to ensure emotional bonding, and henceforth this can lead to the breakdown of the marriages. The nuclear family suffers from emotional overload, which increases the level of conflict between its members. In instances where the family specializes in fewer functions, it can be argued that there are fewer bonds to unite its members. For the economic bond, for example, is considerably weakened when the family ceases to be a unit of production as usual. Similar points have been made by the sociologists who would not regard themselves as functionalists. Graham Allen and Graham Crow believe marriages is less embedded within the economic system than it used to be initially. So there are fewer family-owned businesses, and most importantly, husbands and wives now usually have independent source of income from paid employment. Since fewer people now rely as much as they used to on membership of the family to maintain their income, they are less willing to accept conflict within their spouse and more willing to contemplate divorce. Alan Crowe say incompatibilities which were tolerated are now seen as intolerable, and the absence of love, once seen as unfortunate but bearable, is now taken as indicative of the irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Okay. This sin is particularly affect the willingness of the married women to contemplate divorce. It is increasingly likely that married women will have an independent source of income. So again, it's all about income. Official statistics seem to support the view that it is largely wife's dissatisfaction within the marriage that accounts for the rising divorce rate. In 2005, 69% of divorce were granted to wives, and in over half of these cases, the husband's behavior was the reason for the divorce. This was a dramatic change in comparison with 1946, when wives accounted for 37% of the petitions for divorce and husbands for 63%. However, research by Liam Prince Cook and Vanessa Gash, using data from the British Household Panel Survey, found no connection between women working part-time or full-time and the likelihood of them getting divorced. Furthermore, there was no significant relationship between the level of the earnings of the wives compared to the husbands and divorce rates. This suggested that greater independence for some women as a result of their earnings was not a significant factor affecting the divorce rate. So Gosh argued that because it has become the norm for married women to do paid work, it is no longer a major factor in determining who gets divorced. However, they did find a very much higher divorce rate in families where the husband was unemployed. Okay. So unemployment could contribute to conflict between the spouses in a number of ways, and the research of the USA has identified a number of the other factors which are linked to divorce. Okay. So there are certain factors that increases the chance of the couple. Yes. No. Bihar. Sam from Mumbai. Hi, Karan. I'm from Mumbai. So I'm doing my master's in law. So moving towards marital breakdown, conflicts between spouses. We saw the firstness perspective and all, and my moving is already done. Conflict between the spouses. The reason for conflict, that is the income, paid employment of the wife, and all those things. Okay. So emotional overload and all those things. Oh, I used software.